The Inquisition is not a police force. It's not a military. It's an autonomous organization that answers to almost no one, with the authority to condemn entire worlds to death. They are the Imperium's last line of defense against threats so dangerous that humanity isn't even allowed to know they exist. And the branch that started it all is somehow the most terrifying of them all, Ardo Malleus. The Ardo Malleus is the oldest of the three major Inquisition branches, and it exists for one reason: to hunt demons. Formally established in the mid-32nd millennium following the catastrophic War of the Beasts, this is the branch that set the standard for what the Inquisition would become. And that standard is absolute, uncompromising, and deeply unsettling. Here's how powerful they are. The Ordo Malleus is governed by a council of 169 Inquisitor Lords, each one holding the title of Master. Every single one of them has a right to a direct audience with the Emperor himself. In an empire of trillions, where entire planets can go centuries without receiving a single order from Terra, 169 individuals can walk up to the Golden Throne and speak. That is an almost incomprehensible level of political access, but political power is only half of it. Their chamber militant is the Grey Knights, an entire Space Marine chapter stationed on Titan, the largest moon of Saturn. Every single Grey Knight is a psyker. Every single one is specifically engineered to fight demons. They are arguably the most elite fighting force in the entire Imperium, and they answer exclusively to the Ordo Malleus. Now here's where it gets dark. After any anti-demon operation, every surviving Imperial soldier who witnessed the engagement is executed, not reassigned, not sworn to secrecy, killed. The Grey Knights are the only personnel in the entire Imperium permitted to retain memories of their service against chaos. The logic is brutal, but internally consistent. Knowledge of chaos is itself a vector of corruption. The more you know about demons, the more vulnerable you become to their influence. So ignorance isn't just policy, it's a weapon. And that creates the central irony of the Ordo Malleus. The most powerful, most heavily armed branch of the Inquisition is also the one most committed to ensuring that nobody ever knows it exists or what it fights. They don't want your gratitude. They don't want your awareness. They want your ignorance because your ignorance keeps you alive. But if the Ordo Malleus fights threats from beyond reality, the next branch fights threats that are very much already here. Ordo Xenos. The Ordo Xenos has more confirmed kills than any other branch of the Inquisition. And honestly, that makes perfect sense when you realize the entire Ordo was born from the single worst alien invasion the Imperium has ever faced. Like the Ordo Malleus, Xenos was formally established in the mid-32nd millennium, directly in the aftermath of the War of the Beast. That war was fought against an Orc empire so massive it nearly broke the Imperium in half. The lesson was simple. Aliens weren't just a nuisance, they were an existential threat. So the Inquisition created an entire branch dedicated to hunting them. But here's where it gets interesting. The Ordo Xenos doesn't recruit the way you'd expect. They deliberately select for eccentricity. They want Inquisitors willing to go native, to learn alien languages, to build informant networks deep inside Xenos territory, and to use alien technology when the mission demands it. These agents spend decades embedded in non-human space, studying species that most Imperial citizens would be executed for even acknowledging. Their chamber militant reflects that same philosophy. The Death Watch isn't a single Space Marine chapter. It's a rotating coalition of veteran Astartes seconded from dozens of different chapters for fixed service periods. You've got Space Wolves fighting alongside Ultramarines and Black Templars. Every member brings different combat doctrine, different specializations, different tactical instincts. It makes the Death Watch the most versatile kill team structure in the entire Imperium. But that versatility comes with suspicion. Puritans within the Inquisition look at Xenos agents carrying alien weapons, speaking Tau dialects, and maintaining Eldar contacts, and they see contamination. The core tension of the Ordo is baked into its DNA. To destroy aliens effectively, you have to understand them. And to understand them, you have to become something that other Imperials fundamentally distrust. Nobody illustrates this contradiction better than Inquisitor Lord Kryptman. When Hive Fleet Leviathan descended on the Imperium, Kryptman authorized something unprecedented. He ordered the depopulation of entire star systems to create a buffer zone, stripping the Tyranids of the biomass they needed to sustain their advance. Worlds burned, billions died, and it worked. The strategy successfully disrupted the Hive Fleet's momentum, so the Imperium rewarded him by declaring him excommunicate traitorous, essentially excommunicated from the Inquisition entirely. A man who technically saved the Imperium was punished for the methods he used to do it. That's the Ordo Xenos in a single story. Pragmatism that works wrapped in methods that nobody wants to accept. And the Ordo holds one final card that makes even other Inquisitors nervous. The authority to declare exterminators. Planetary annihilation. If an alien threat is deemed uncontainable, Xenos Inquisitors can order an entire world reduced to ash. No appeals, no oversight. But if you think alien hunters operating in moral gray zones is unsettling, wait until you meet the Ordo that hunts humanity's own people. Ordo Hereticus. The Ordo Malleus was born from demons. The Ordo Xenos was born from aliens. The Ordo Hereticus was born from one man. In the 36th millennium, a High Lord named Goge Vendira managed to seize control of both the administratum and the ecclesiarchy simultaneously. That's the entire bureaucratic apparatus of the Imperium and its state church, both under one person. He used that power to launch a reign of terror so catastrophic it nearly tore the Imperium apart from the inside. No Xenos invasion, no demonic incursion, just one human with too much authority and zero accountability. By the time Vandir was finally killed, the damage was so severe that the Imperium created an entirely new branch of the Inquisition with a single founding purpose. Make sure this never happens again. That's the Ordo Hereticus, the Witch Hunters. Their mandate is deliberately, almost absurdly broad. Hunt heresy, hunt mutation, hunt rogue psychers, hunt corruption within the clergy, the arbits, the Astartes, and even other branches of the Inquisition itself. There is no jurisdictional ceiling. No one is above suspicion except the Emperor. Every single institution in the Imperium falls under their gaze, including the very organizations designed to protect it. Their chamber militant is the Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, an all-female military order whose existence is itself a masterpiece of legal loophole engineering. After the Reign of Blood, the ecclesiarchy was forbidden from maintaining men under arms, so they arm women instead, technically compliant, ruthlessly effective, and now permanently bonded to the Ordo tasked with policing the church that created them. But here's where it gets unsettling. Unlike Malleus Inquisitors who hunt literal demons, or Xenos Inquisitors tracking alien civilizations, Hereticus Inquisitors spend their entire careers hunting fellow humans. Their enemies aren't monsters. They're priests, governors, soldiers, and citizens. People who look exactly like the loyal subjects they're supposed to protect. And that job changes a person. Hereticus Inquisitors are documented across the lore as darker, more paranoid, and more psychologically damaged than their counterparts in the other Ordos Majoris. They develop a specific kind of operational coldness. They become comfortable ordering the execution of innocents on suspicion alone, because in their experience, the rot is always deeper than it appears. Miss one heretic and you lose a planet. Burn 100 innocents and you sleep fine knowing the alternative was worse. Their operating logic captures this perfectly. It approaches something close to if innocent, why accuse? A circular reasoning trap where the accusation itself becomes evidence of guilt. It makes them terrifyingly effective at rooting out genuine threats. It also makes them one of the most dangerous forces in the Imperium for anyone unlucky enough to attract their attention. And that's the dark irony at the heart of the Ordo Hereticus. They were created because one man accumulated too much unchecked power. Their solution was to create an organization with almost unlimited unchecked power. The Imperium looked at tyranny and said the answer is more tyranny, just pointed in the right direction. But if hunting heretics inside your own civilization sounds grim, wait until you see what happens when the Inquisition turns its attention to the people who do the killing on its behalf. Ordo Sicarius. The Imperium's solution to a rogue assassin problem was to create an entire branch of the Inquisition dedicated to spying on spies. Let that sink in for a second. Ordo Sicarius exists because of the same catastrophe that birthed the Ordo Hereticus. During Goge Vandir's reign of blood, the Officio Assassinorum, the Imperium's official organization of professional killers, was turned into Vandir's personal hit squad. Instead of eliminating genuine threats to humanity, Imperial assassins were deployed against political rivals, inconvenient officials, and anyone who looked at the High Lord funny. After Vandir fell in the wars of vindication tore through the aftermath, the Imperium realized something terrifying. The most dangerous weapons in the galaxy had zero oversight. Enter Inquisitor Jaeger, who found founded Ordo Sicarius with one singular mandate: investigate, moderate, and control the Officio Assassinorum. Every single Imperial assassin deployment now requires majority approval from the High Lords of Terra before it can proceed. No vote, no kill, at least on paper. But here's where it gets interesting. Sicarius doesn't just approve missions before they happen. They also review assassinations retroactively, meaning an assassin can complete a kill, and then Sicarius steps in afterward to officially decide whether that kill was justified. They can condemn a completed assassination or rubber stamp it as necessary after the target is already dead. The Imperium literally built a bureaucratic process for deciding if a murder was acceptable after the murder already happened. That is the most 40,000 thing imaginable. Now, their actual method of control is where this gets genuinely absurd. Ordo Sicarius maintains hidden agents embedded inside the Assassinorum temples themselves, disguised as regular personnel. Moles, informants, secret inquisitorial operatives walk in the halls of training facilities filled with people who have been raised from childhood to detect exactly this kind of infiltration. Think about that for a moment. The Officio Assassinorum trains Vindicare snipers, Kalidas shapeshifters, Eversor berserkers, and Calexis blanks. These are individuals who can read micro-expressions, detect physiological deception, and kill a target from distances that shouldn't be physically possible. And Sicarius is sending undercover agents to live among them. The tension here isn't subtle. You're asking normal operatives to fool career killers whose entire existence revolves around identifying and eliminating hidden threats. And nobody in the lore addresses the obvious recursive problem. Sicarius polices the assassins. But who polices Sicarius? There's no Ordo dedicated to watching the Watchers who watch the Watchers. At some point, the Imperium just shrugged and said, we'll trust these ones, which, given that the entire reason Sicarius exists is because the Imperium trusted the wrong people with the Officio, feels like a lesson they refuse to learn. The whole thing reads like a bureaucratic Ouroboros, an inquisitorial branch founded on the principle that unchecked power is dangerous, operating with functionally unchecked power over the most dangerous operatives in the Imperium. But if you think internal surveillance on assassins sounds like a headache, wait until you meet the Ordo that's trying to investigate something even harder to pin down: time itself. Ordo Chronos. This one is different. Every other Ordo on this list exists. You can find their inquisitors, trace their operations, point to their chamber militant. The Ordo Chronos doesn't have any of that because the Ordo Chronos is gone. Let me explain. The Ordo Chronos was formed to investigate the consequences of temporal manipulation through the warp. And before you think time travel in 40K, yes, the warp doesn't obey linear time. Ships entering the Immaterium can arrive at their destination before they left. Entire fleets have emerged centuries after they departed, with crews that haven't aged a day. Time in the 40K universe is not a fixed line. It's a suggestion. And it was broken enough, exploited enough, and weaponized enough that the Inquisition decided it needed an entire branch dedicated to monitoring it. That branch was the Ordo Chronos. And for a while, it operated like any other Ordo Minoris, investigating temporal anomalies, cataloging warp-related time distortions, and trying to make sense of a galaxy where cause and effect don't always happen in the right order. But here's where it gets unsettling. At some point during the 41st millennium, the Ordo Chronos vanished. No dissolution order, no formal disbandment, no record of what happened. The Ordo Chronos simply ceased to exist. Canon states only that their eventual return remains a subject of legend amongst the few who knew they ever existed. That phrasing is doing a lot of heavy lifting. It doesn't say they were destroyed. It doesn't say they failed. It says their return remains a subject of legend, as if someone somewhere still expects them to come back. And then things got even stranger. When the Ordo Chronos resurfaced in the early 42nd millennium, it immediately plunged into what the lore calls the Chronostrife. This wasn't a war over territory or ideology. It was a war over the date. When Robout Gayman was resurrected and began his Indomitus crusade, it became horrifyingly clear that the imperial dating system had fallen into deep, fundamental error. Centuries of warp distortion, temporal anomalies, and bureaucratic decay meant nobody actually knew what year it was. The people whose entire job was understanding time were now confronted with proof that the Imperium's calendar was broken beyond repair, and it tore the Ordo apart from the inside. The theories about the original disappearance are all equally disturbing. Some believe the Ordo became temporally displaced, meaning they still exist but in a completely different time period, possibly the past, possibly the far future, unable to return. Others speculate they fragmented into secret cells operating outside the normal inquisitorial hierarchy, hidden not by secrecy but by temporal dislocation. And the darkest theory is the simplest. They discovered something about the nature of time itself that made conventional operation impossible. Something so fundamentally destabilizing that the Ordo couldn't survive knowing it. Nobody knows which explanation is true, and that's the point. The Ordo Chronos is one of the only elements of 40K lore that is deliberately, intentionally incomplete. Most of what exists about them is in-universe rumor, whispered between Inquisitors who aren't even sure the Ordo was real. It's a ghost story inside a galaxy that already runs on nightmares. But if an entire Ordo dedicated to understanding time couldn't survive the knowledge they uncovered, and then couldn't even hold itself together once it returned, that raises a question nobody in the Imperium wants to ask. What exactly did they find? And what happens when the calendar breaks again? But at least the Chronos only lost track of time. The next Ordo lost track of reality itself. Ordo Scriptorum. They call themselves the Unsleeping Eye. Remember that. It's going to be funny in about 30 seconds. The Ordo Scriptorum is one of 17 inquisitorial branches physically based on Terra, and their entire purpose is the examination and investigation of imperial records, communications, and data archives. Every message sent, every order filed, every logistical report generated across a civilization spanning hundreds of thousands of worlds falls under their jurisdiction. They are responsible for ensuring the integrity of the Imperium's information infrastructure, the documentation that keeps a million-world bureaucracy functioning, the communications that coordinate wars across entire galactic sectors, and they have 6 Inquisitors. 6 for the entire galaxy. The Unsleeping Eye has fewer members than a pickup basketball team. You could fit the whole Ordo in a minivan. This is the organization tasked with monitoring every record produced by a civilization of trillions, and they could all share a single dinner table with room to spare. But here's the thing, before you write them off as a joke, consider what those 6 people actually do. Because the Ordo Scriptorum doesn't just read paperwork, they define it. Every action taken under Imperial authority must be logged, filed, verified, and cross-referenced through systems they oversee. Every requisition form, every troop deployment order, every planetary tithe calculation runs through documentation protocols that Scriptorum established and maintains. They don't just observe the bureaucracy, they are the bureaucracy, and that's where it stops being funny. The Imperium of Man is infamous for administrative paralysis. Reinforcement requests that arrive decades after the world they were meant to save has already fallen. Supply shipments routed through 17 verification stages before a single crate moves. Entire planetary populations starving because the correct form wasn't filed in triplicate with the appropriate sub-office on a space station 3 systems away. This isn't just background flavor, it's a systemic failure that costs the Imperium time, resources, and lives on a continuous galactic scale. And the Ordo Scriptorum's oversight requirements are directly responsible for compounding it. Every layer of documentation they mandate adds another bottleneck. Every verification protocol adds another delay. 6 Inquisitors created a bureaucratic machine so massive and so slow that it actively undermines the Imperium's ability to defend itself. They built the maze, and now nobody can find the exit. Here's where it gets darker. Some fans have pointed out that an Ordo dedicated to total information access doesn't just create inefficiency, it creates leverage. If you have access to every record in the Imperium, you have access to every mistake, every contradiction, every quietly buried scandal attached to every Imperial official who ever signed their name to anything. Whether that's intentional policy or just a structural side effect, information that comprehensive is inherently political power. 6 Inquisitors with access to the receipts of an entire galaxy don't need an army. They just need the right file at the right time. So, the Unsleeping Eye watches everything, controls the flow of information across human civilization, and may or may not be holding blackmail material on half the Imperium's leadership, all with a staff you could count on your fingers. But if you think a galaxy-spanning records office run by 6 people is an absurd way to manage information, wait until you hear about the Ordo that's trying to figure out which parts of 10,000 years of imperial history are actually real. Ordo Originatus. The Imperium of Man has 10,000 years of recorded history, and almost none of it is true. That's not an exaggeration. The Imperium's historical record is a layered mess of religious propaganda, deliberate falsification, mythologized accounts, and outright fabrication stacked so deep that separating fact from fiction is essentially impossible. The Ordo Originatus exists to try anyway. Their mandate is simple on paper and nightmarish in practice. Figure out what actually happened. Let me explain why that's harder than it sounds. The defining event of imperial history, the Horus Heresy, happened 10,000 years ago. 10 millennia. That's 10,000 years of the ecclesiarchy rewriting events to fit religious doctrine. 10,000 years of political factions editing records to flatter their predecessors. 10,000 years of the administratum losing, misplacing, or accidentally destroying original documents across a million worlds. By the time an Originatus Inquisitor sits down to investigate something as basic as what really happened during the Siege of Terra, they're not reading history. They're reading mythology that's been through a galactic game of telephone for longer than most human civilizations have existed. But here's where it gets truly absurd. The Imperium doesn't just have bad record keeping. It has an entire inquisitorial branch dedicated to making records worse on purpose. The Ordo Redactus exists specifically to censor, destroy, and black out sensitive historical information. Their entire job is information suppression. So picture this. One branch of the Inquisition is trying to uncover the truth, and another branch of the exact same organization is actively working to bury it. Both are legitimate, both have inquisitorial authority, and they are in direct institutional opposition to each other at all times. That's not dysfunction, that is the system. The Imperium simultaneously wants to know its own history and wants to make sure nobody else does. Now, there's been a recent and genuinely significant development. Primarch Rabaut Guilliman, freshly resurrected after 10,000 years in stasis and now serving as Lord Commander of the Imperium, established the Logos Historica Verita. This is a scholarly organization created with direct Primarch-level authority specifically to support Originatus' work. Guilliman, being someone who actually lived through the events Originatus is trying to reconstruct, apparently looked at the state of imperial history and decided it was unacceptable. That's not ancient backstory, that's active, current lore. A Primarch is personally backing the effort to untangle 10 millennia of lies, and it still might not matter. Here's the gut punch. The Ordo Originatus has zero authority to actually change anything. They can investigate. They can determine that a widely accepted historical account is completely fabricated. They can prove it with evidence, but they cannot make the Imperium believe the corrected version. Their findings carry no institutional weight outside their own records. The ecclesiarchy won't update its sermons. The administratum won't rewrite its archives. The billions of faithful across a million worlds will continue believing with whatever version of history keeps them obedient and loyal. Every truth Originatus uncovers is politically inert, dead on arrival, filed away in classified archives that almost nobody will ever read. Think about that for a second. The Imperium created an entire inquisitorial order to find the truth about its own history. Then it made those findings classified. The very existence of Originatus is the Imperium admitting, in institutional form, that its history is largely fictional. And then it classified that admission too. It's a closed loop of futility. Originatus digs through 10,000 years of lies, fights past the Ordo Redactus trying to stop them, gets backing from a literal Primarch, and produces findings that will change absolutely nothing about how the Imperium operates. The truth exists. It just doesn't matter. And if you think an Ordo dedicated to finding truths nobody wants to hear sounds frustrating, wait until you hear about the one tasked with verifying miracles in a galaxy where the gods of chaos will sacrifice entire populations just to fake one. Ordo Obsoletus. Every other Ordo on this list has a job that's difficult. This one has a job that might be impossible. The Ordo Obsoletus is tasked with monitoring and authenticating unexplained phenomena across the Imperium. Specifically, they're the ones who have to figure out whether a reported miracle is a genuine manifestation of the Emperor's divine will or an elaborate deception engineered by chaos or Xenos forces. And before you think that sounds straightforward, consider this. The chaos gods have been documented sacrificing entire planetary populations just to fabricate a single convincing miracle. Thousands of lives burned through the warp to create one false sign, one fake divine intervention, specifically designed to corrupt imperial faith from the inside out. Obsoletus was created to catch exactly that. Their case files read like fever dreams. They've been tracking the Legion of the Damned, a spectral force of space marines wreathed in ghostly fire that appears without warning on battlefields where Imperial forces are about to be annihilated. They turn the tide, they save thousands, and then they vanish without a single trace. No communications, no wreckage, no bodies. The Legion shows up, wins the fight, and disappears like they were never there. Obsoletus has to look at that and determine whether it's the Emperor's hand reaching from the Golden Throne or something far worse wearing a convincing disguise. Then there's Lord Varlak, killed on Kursk II, confirmed dead. Then he appeared again on Necromunda, killed again. Then he showed up on Banner 21, same man, same death. Multiple times, Obsoletus documented every single occurrence and still has zero definitive answers for how or why. But here's where it gets deeply, fundamentally uncomfortable. There is no empirical method to distinguish a genuine divine miracle from a sufficiently sophisticated supernatural deception. None. The warp doesn't leave fingerprints. Chaos doesn't sign its work. If a dark god wanted to perfectly replicate the Emperor's divine intervention, there is no test, no instrument, no psychic scan that could reliably tell the difference. The Ordo Obsoletus are investigators assigned to a question that investigation literally cannot answer. Their entire mandate is epistemologically broken, and they know it. And their institutional status only makes things stranger. Canon doesn't even definitively confirm whether Obsoletus is a formal Ordo Minoris or just a regional inquisitorial conclave that gave itself an impressive title. They might not even be a real Ordo. They might be a handful of inquisitors operating under an inflated name, chasing a question nobody wants answered. Because that's the darkest reading of all this, and it's one the community has latched onto hard. Some fans believe Obsoletus has already reached its conclusion, that after centuries of investigation, after cataloging every spectral apparition, an impossible resurrection and battlefield miracle across the Imperium, they've determined that most of these events are not genuine, that the miracles billions of Imperial citizens stake their faith on are, in large part, warp manipulation, chaos theater, lies wearing holy masks, and they continue operating anyway, not because they haven't found the answer, but because the answer is more dangerous than the question. Telling the Imperium that its faith is being systematically exploited by the very forces it defines itself against would shatter the ecclesiarchy, collapse morale across entire sectors, and potentially unravel the psychological foundation that holds 1 trillion human souls together. The Imperium runs on faith. It is the single binding force across 1 million worlds. And if that faith is built on fabricated miracles, then the truth isn't a revelation. It's a weapon of mass destruction. So Obsoletus may be the keepers of a lie the Imperium cannot survive learning, an order that exists not to find the truth, but to make sure nobody else does. Inquisitors who started as miracle hunters and became quietly and without fanfare the guardians of the greatest deception in human history. An Inquisition branch that may be suppressing the truth about the Emperor's own miracles. And if that doesn't keep you up at night, nothing in this galaxy will. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.